of our sort of way forward discussion, I think the first point to make is that we are busy developing this concept and this notion of a climate justice deal for the majority, for the many in South Africa that have been, if you like, excluded from our democracy and from the gains and benefits of this democracy, but who are also not the ones that have caused the climate problem, but yet are carrying the greatest burden and harms that come with this. So this is who the climate justice deal is for, because what we've had over 2.5 decades, besides being exclusionary, has been deeply polarizing. And we've got a very, very fragile society. And it's a society that's turning on itself. It's turning on others, if you like. There's a xenophobic streak in the society. There's a resurgent racism in the society, etc. So this is a climate justice deal to bring together the majority. And this is very, very important. And it's going to be redistributive because it has to address the legacies, both of apartheid, but also of ANC neoliberal governance that we've had for over 2.5 decades. It also has to be transformative, which means that it's got to start contributing to building the systems that can help us decarbonize. It has to contribute to decarbonization. It has to contribute to the new systems that we have to develop to meet our needs, and of course, build capabilities. So that's where the climate justice deal idea sits. Now, we are not about just translating and cutting and pasting and importing frameworks. And we welcome learning from other contexts, whether it's about a Green New Deal, whether it's about donut economics, etc. And it's important to take on board what we can from these experiences. But we're also trying to shape something for our context. And so if you look at planetary boundaries, I mean, planetary boundaries are not easy to translate to a national country level. It's not easy to just translate it to a company level, etc. methodologically. There's a lot of scientific measurement that has to go into that together with economics. But nonetheless, I mean, even if we don't go the donut route in terms of what we're trying to develop here, we will still draw on climate science, and we will still draw on earth science, etc., for what we are doing. I mean, right now, in terms of planetary boundary work, they've just measured the water boundary and they've measured the ocean acidification boundary. And what they've realized is that we are now overshooting both ocean acidification as well as the water boundary on a planetary scale. And that's again, another very serious challenge that's coming our way. So we are definitely going to draw on scientific knowledge. We're going to draw on earth science, climate science, etc., as part of this framework. Now, there's an issue that came up in the conversation. It's implicit in some of the papers and in some of the debate, and that's about, do we position macroeconomic policy thinking around catching up with the global? Well, there's two issues here. I mean, the one is the urgency of the science of climate change. And the alarm bell is ringing very, very loud. The next round of reporting in the IPCC, the sixth round of reporting that will come now as we go to the next COP summit at the end of the year, is also showing and telling us there's already some preliminary reports that we are really in a desperate situation. And so everything we do is time sensitive. And that breakthrough has been made, which relates to the second point. And that is, this government has been stuck in a particular mold around how it thinks about climate diplomacy and international relations. And it's been disingenuous because it is a carbon criminal state. But it's assumed that it can position itself to bargain with the global north for resources so that it can make the transition. Well, what's happened now is that the climate regime is changing globally, and it's changing very fast. There is a breakthrough amongst the ruling elites in other parts of the world, and particularly the global north, and they're really playing the climate game. I mean, with all their net zero targets, their attempts to think about Green New Deals, the Biden shift, etc. So the whole global climate regime is changing very, very fast. South Africa cannot say it's going to industrialize old style for another 20, 30 years and then kind of join the climate challenge. No, that's over. Its exports are not going to leave our ports if it is not making this transition very, very seriously. I mean, European Union diplomats have really chided the South African government for really not being serious on climate and its climate ambitions. The Climate Commission is not serious about the ambition as well. So the we position macroeconomic policy, particularly a climate justice deal, has to take these imperatives on board. It must hasten. It must add to the momentum for transformation. The other point to make is that in the diagnosis that has been shared by all the collaborators and contributors, there's some very, very powerful insights, but we'd like that to be enriched a little bit more. We'd like you to give us more detail, and I mentioned that in relation to Patrick around pollution costs, climate debt costs. The IEJ paper can tell us more as well around the diagnosis around climate injustice in South Africa. And inequality is very, very important for this entire framework. We're going to foreground inequality, so more data around inequality and how this framework tackles that challenge is very, very important for us. Now, all of these papers have also been kind of picking up on proposals and articulating proposals, etc., and we welcome that, and that's what we want. But please also engage with the Climate Justice Charter. I mean, many of those alternatives come from movements themselves. They come from grassroots voices and forces, and they are part of the climate justice imaginary. So when we talk about jobs, we really talk about climate jobs. There's been a campaign in the country for many, many years, embraced by unions and so on. So you start using that language. But there are some debates that have also come up around proposals, and I'm going to get into that. But the common challenge and task we want to give to our friends and colleagues is give us more detail around proposals, unpack the proposals. So even if we're talking about green industrialization, unpack it. Help us understand what is the spend, what industries are being selected, how they'll be enabled, etc., etc. So that we can really stop and step out in this debate and say, well, here's the numbers, here's this, here's that. And that's going to be very, very important. In terms of some of the debates that were triggered here, I think the first issue is on green industrial policy. And I think nobody's opposed to industrial policy in this conversation, but I think we're also saying we got to be realistic. It's not going to be the silver bullet, but what is it really? And we've got to really unpack it, which sectors and so on. And that's going to be very, very important. The other issue is around climate jobs. And here, I think our assumption is that this has to be decent. But more than that, if you look at the charter, there's various places where there's potential for climate jobs. We are calling for a national firefighting service. South Africa doesn't have a national firefighting service. That's a frontline climate job. We're going to be having lots more fires and so on. There's the whole issue of food sovereignty. There's a whole issue of managing biodiversity and things like that. There's so many places where we can have climate jobs. But what we'd like from our friends and contributors is work out some numbers for us. Even if you give us the modeling for what one climate job can be at a decent wage, we can then work with that to aggregate it in relation to other proposals and ideas. So we really want to get into the numbers. This is very, very important. So we say through the charter process and this macroeconomic deal, if we can have, the modeling that has been done around climate jobs suggests that we can have 3 million jobs in South Africa. But I think with some of the new ideas that we have, we could actually have potentially 5 or 6 million climate jobs or more. Okay, so we need some numbers to help us engage in the public discourse around that. The other debate that has come up is around, yes, the care economy, but we also got to think about the informal sector. We also got to think about culture. Culture and the link to working time came up, and that's something we really got to think through. Investments in these infrastructures, but also how working time can help us bring down consumption and the use of resources and energy. So that's something we got to really unpack a little bit more. The issue of the U-big, pension funds and public goods, there's a nexus of issues here that we need to debate further. I mean, what does this mean in terms of how we conceiving of a welfare system in South Africa? And we haven't exhausted this issue, but it'd be really nice if we could start thinking that through a little bit more, um, so that we have a perspective. The issue of renewable energy came up as a debate. So there's the public provisioning approach. So, we use ESCOM to roll this out. But there's also the socially owned renewable approach, which is bottom up in communities, etc. I'm not sure these things are mutually exclusive, but they're going to be something we're going to have to think about. We're also going to have to think about the numbers. I mean, Stellenbosch University academics did a study. We can meet our energy needs 8 times over through offshore wind, and they've already mapped the locations for that. We've also got several studies from the CSIR, etc. There's concentrated solar stuff, etc. So the political geography of renewables in South Africa is going to be very complex. But households, particularly poor households, can benefit from renewable energy pools, because they can sell back to the grid, and this could be a redistributive mechanism as well. So we've got to really think about how that fits into our thinking and where we want to go with the climate justice deal. So this is also then thinking about incentives here, not just for the rich and so on, but for incentives for the working class and the poor as well. We also got to think about climate insurance fund. It's there in the climate justice charter. Nobody picked up on it, but we think it's a novel idea. And we do think that as climate shocks hit, South Africa needs, like the unemployment insurance fund, we need a climate insurance fund. That's going to be a cushion for our society. It should be a public fund, and it should be able to help people rebuild their lives if their homes are washed away or destroyed catastrophically, etc., etc. So a climate insurance fund is something we really think we need to give some thought to. Financing has come up, and there's some great ideas from all our contributors. And again, more detail will help the public debate that we want to enter into. So please unpack things a little bit more in your proposals around financing, and give us quantums, give us magnitudes, give us numbers so we can use this. Planning has come up, but we haven't fully exhausted this issue. Planning has to feature in how we're thinking about the deep just transition. I mean, if 62% of water resources is consumed by industrial agriculture in South Africa, that's not the future for us. So we have to plan the use of our water resources. It's very, very urgent, but together with other very important resources as well. So planning becomes important. I mean, allocating, if you like, carbon budgets, that should be a planning function. Industries are going to have to cut back in some instances and disappear. Others are going to have to kind of crank up a little bit and so on. But planning will help us think about what level of depletion of resources we want from an ecological point of view. But it'll also help us think about what levels of pollution do we want, including carbon emissions. And that's a planning question. You cannot just leave this to the market to organize this. It's really not going to work. So we got to come back to this question on democratic planning. And then finally, to conclude in terms of our timeline, this has been a very, very stimulating engagement, and a big thank you to all contributors. But the next round is also going to be very, very exciting. We're planning this for early August, around the 8th of August, so please diarize this. We'd like you to give us another iteration of your papers, excluding Asghar, of course, he's done everything. But to really take it to a level, as I've been saying, where there's more detail, there's more measurement, there's more quantum, either in your diagnosis, either in your proposals, etc., so that we can shift the public debate. I mean, there's an ambition here. We want to take on the austerity, sort of backward-looking economic and recovery plan, but we got to be on solid ground when we're doing this. So that's the next round of conversation. And as Marcus said, this, we invited everyone to come that we know. There were over 50 confirmations for this discussion, but we'll still share the recordings. We'll continue this discussion being open the next time round, and we'll also invite comrades to come. Thereafter, we'll work towards a synthesis report. And the synthesis report we want to surface early November when the COP is sitting in the UK. It'll be a draft. And again, we'll have another workshop, more debate, more discussion. These are big issues, complex issues. And then, of course, we'll use December and January to finalize this climate justice deal, which will then surface in February, either before or during the State of the Nation address or the budget speech, whatever. But from now till then, there's some exciting issues for all of us to think about. We are starting a podcast series on the climate justice deal framework. We have other thinkers thinking with us. Many of them couldn't come here today. They did contribute to the first round of thinking. We've got a great study on the carbon footprint of South Africa's rich, which we'll also bring in from Oxfam. We've got a great paper from Alfredo Saad-Fullo from King's College in London. We are talking actively to Ariel Saleh, one of the leading ecofeminists, who has a particular view on a pluriversal vision of a climate justice deal. We're talking to Barry Gills from Globalizations, the journal. They're doing a lot of work on critiquing economics. So he'll also be part of our podcast series with other economists, including Jason Hickel, who was part of that series. So a lot of those people are in conversation with us, and they'll be orbiting and be part of this process as we go down this road. So once again, thank you to all our contributors, Patrick, Carolee from IEJ, Duma, Asghar, and thank you for all of you for making the time and to be here today. We hope you enjoyed it, and this was food for thought. Please take care and be safe and enjoy your weekend. Goodbye.